It begins with a sound. A knife, scraping against plaster. A whisper, too soft to be human, threading itself through a farmhouse that no longer exists. In 1937, investigators entered the Morlok home outside Springfield, Illinois, and wrote in their reports that they could still hear scratching behind the walls. The house was empty. The family was gone. Yet something remained. Something that would not let them leave quietly. The Morloks were remembered only in passing. An immigrant family of German descent, quiet, stern, deeply religious. But in the summer of 1937, their name became synonymous with madness. That year, 4 young girls were discovered wandering barefoot along the dirt roads, identical in face, vacant in expression, the infamous Genain Quadruplets. They were taken into state custody. Their parents were nowhere to be found. But what the records omit, what doctors, priests, and bureaucrats buried, is that the girls' origins were not as simple as a tragic family breakdown. Whispers surrounded the Morlok land. Occult experiments, genetic manipulation, a pact between church officials and state scientists. The Morlok name, scrubbed from local memory, was attached to rumors of rituals that predated the town itself. The question has never been answered, because it was never supposed to be asked. What happened to the Morloks? And who were the Genain sisters, really? It begins with a sound. A knife, scraping against plaster. A whisper, too soft to be human, threading itself through a farmhouse that no longer exists. In 1937, investigators entered the Morlok home outside Springfield, Illinois, and wrote in their reports that they could still hear scratching behind the walls. The house was empty. The family was gone. Yet something remained. Something that would not let them leave quietly. The Morloks were remembered only in passing. An immigrant family of German descent, quiet, stern, deeply religious. But in the summer of 1937, their name became synonymous with madness. That year, 4 young girls were discovered wandering barefoot along the dirt roads, identical in face, vacant in expression, the infamous Genain Quadruplets. They were taken into state custody. Their parents were nowhere to be found. But what the records omit, what doctors, priests, and bureaucrats buried, is that the girls' origins were not as simple as a tragic family breakdown. Whispers surrounded the Morlok land. Occult experiments, genetic manipulation, a pact between church officials and state scientists. The Morlok name, scrubbed from local memory, was attached to rumors of rituals that predated the town itself. The question has never been answered, because it was never supposed to be asked. What happened to the Morloks? And who were the Genain sisters, really? It begins with a sound. A knife, scraping against plaster. A whisper, too soft to be human, threading itself through a farmhouse that no longer exists. In 1937, investigators entered the Morlok home outside Springfield, Illinois, and wrote in their reports that they could still hear scratching behind the walls. The house was empty. The family was gone. Yet something remained. Something that would not let them leave quietly. The Morloks were remembered only in passing. An immigrant family of German descent, quiet, stern, deeply religious. But in the summer of 1937, their name became synonymous with madness. That year, 4 young girls were discovered wandering barefoot along the dirt roads, identical in face, vacant in expression, the infamous Genain Quadruplets. They were taken into state custody. Their parents were nowhere to be found. But what the records omit, what doctors, priests, and bureaucrats buried, is that the girls' origins were not as simple as a tragic family breakdown. Whispers surrounded the Morlok land. Occult experiments, genetic manipulation, a pact between church officials and state scientists. The Morlok name, scrubbed from local memory, was attached to rumors of rituals that predated the town itself. The question has never been answered, because it was never supposed to be asked. What happened to the Morloks? And who were the Genain sisters, really? The official documents describe the Morlok family in clipped, bureaucratic language. Father, mother, for children. Farmers, poor but respectable. No history of crime. No history of madness. But that's a lie. Neighbors later recalled oddities, hymns sung at midnight, lights burning long into the dawn, children who never seemed to grow taller from one year to the next. A mailman testified, in a forgotten deposition, that he saw the father dig trenches in the field at night, whispering words not in English, not in German, but in some language he could not recognize. By the 1920s, the Morlocks had retreated almost entirely from public life. The children were rarely seen at school. When questioned, the mother claimed persistent illnesses, vague afflictions that kept them hidden indoors. Yet witnesses swore they saw more than 4 children peering from the upstairs windows. It was not until 1937 that their name would surface again, tied now to horror. The Genain Quadruplets, 4 identical sisters, were presented to the world as a miracle of genetics, a case study in inherited mental illness. They were paraded through hospitals, laboratories, and clinics, becoming the property of science. But beneath their clinical files, beneath the staged photographs of smiling doctors, were notes scratched out, pages missing, and a single repeated phrase: Morlok stock. No one was meant to know what that meant. No one was meant to connect the girls to the family who had vanished from Springfield. But we will. Springfield is a city built on layers of memory. Beneath its courthouse and its cobblestone streets lie the bones of a frontier town, and beneath those bones lie older things: mounds, burial grounds, artifacts of people whose names were erased before the first church bell rang. By the 1930s, Springfield had modernized. Automobiles, neon signs, radios crackling with Roosevelt's voice. But on the outskirts, past the reach of electric lights, were places the town preferred not to acknowledge. The Morlok farm was one of them. Children were warned not to go near it. They said the soil was sour, the animals born there deformed. When the wind shifted, strange odors carried across the cornfields, like burning meat, like singed hair. But the strangest thing was the silence. Birds did not sing in the Morlok trees. Stray dogs skirted the fences. Farmers swore that plows broke against the earth there, as if something metallic and unyielding lay buried just beneath the dirt. When the family disappeared, the town did not organize a search. There were no vigils, no church prayers. Instead, the name Morlok was swallowed whole. Newspapers did not report it. Officials filed no missing person reports. It was as if the family had never lived there at all. And when the Genain sisters appeared, wandering barefoot miles from the abandoned farm, the town looked away. They were handed over to state care without question. For Springfield, forgetting was easier than remembering. The Genain Quadruplets were not the first children linked to the Morlocks. Old county baptism records, smudged and half-burned, list multiple children registered under their name, yet the numbers never align. In 1915, for infants baptized. In 1919, 3 more. In 1922, 6. By 1925, the records abruptly stop. How many children did the Morlocks truly have? No one knows. Neighbors whispered about the changeling girls. 4 identical faces peering out from the attic window, sometimes at once, sometimes only 2, sometimes 6. One farmer's wife swore she saw the same child twice in town, standing on opposite sides of the street, staring at each other in silence. The girls never played in the schoolyard, never attended Sunday school. Yet their names appear in state files: Nora, Myra, Iris, Hester. Later, they would be renamed Nina, Nora, Nona, and Nira, names stripped of individuality, stamped into laboratory neatness. To the state, they were Genain, a pseudonym derived from the Greek word for dreadful birth. To the Morlocks, they were something else entirely. Some said the Morlocks had made a bargain. Others believed they had simply bred them through incest, ritual, or experiment, carrying out the will of something older than science. The children were evidence. But evidence of what? No one dared to ask. When the quadruplets were discovered in 1937, they were immediately absorbed into the psychiatric machine of the era. Newspapers called them a wonder. 4 identical sisters, born of one womb, each destined to reveal the secrets of madness. The National Institute of Mental Health sent men in black coats. They posed with the girls for photographs, doctors in white coats, grinning beside vacant-eyed children. To the public, these were images of progress. To anyone looking closely, they were something else: possession. The doctors recorded everything: the way the girls walked, the way they spoke, how they slept, even how they cried. They forced the sisters to play together while hidden observers scribbled notes. They dissected their family history, fabricating tales of genetic inferiority. They claimed the father was abusive, the mother hysterical. But when pressed for sources, the paper trail dissolved into silence. What the doctors did not publish were their night experiments. Locked rooms, Electrodes applied to small skulls. Isolation chambers. Each girl separated from her sisters for days at a time, then reunited, only to stare through each other as if they no longer recognized their own blood. The doctors said they were studying inheritance of schizophrenia. But behind closed doors, their language shifted, doubling, cloning, mirroring. Terms that belonged less to psychiatry than to forbidden sciences whispered in Europe between wars. The girls became property, and property can be destroyed, altered, erased, without anyone ever asking why. While doctors claimed the quadruplets as medical specimens, the church had its own designs. Springfield's diocesan archives contain an unsigned letter, marked only with a red seal. It warns, the Morlok stock is dangerous. Their lineage must not spread beyond their blood. Containment through doctrine or destruction, both are acceptable. What doctrine meant is unclear, but what destruction meant was all too evident. Parishioners later admitted that the Morlocks were denied baptism for their later children. The family was shunned, whispered about as marked. Priests refused to enter their farmhouse, even to administer last rites. One cleric described the property as unclean, as if consecrated to something that was not God. And yet, church officials watched closely. They funded orphanages where special children were taken. They worked hand in hand with physicians who dissected the minds of the poor. They stood in pulpits preaching morality while quietly directing the flow of children into asylums. The Morlocks were caught in the jaws of this machinery, too strange for society, too useful for erasure. Their daughters were both condemned and coveted. The quadruplets, when shown crucifixes in later tests, reacted not with fear, but with laughter, high-pitched, identical giggles that unsettled even hardened psychiatrists. One doctor wrote in his notes, "They do not recognize the symbol, or perhaps they recognize it too well." If the church wanted to suppress the Morlocks, and the doctors wanted to exploit them, then the question becomes, who, or what, were the Morlocks themselves serving? In 1941, for years after the disappearance of the Morlocks, workers digging a drainage ditch near the old farmhouse struck something metallic. They thought it was farm equipment. Instead, they uncovered a sealed iron door embedded in the earth. The sheriff ordered it sealed again. No photographs, no records. The men who unearthed it were told to forget. But one foreman's diary survives, passed secretly through his family. It describes the door as engraved with symbols, sharp to the touch, that left welts on bare skin. The door was not opened, but the ground around it was covered with quicklime, as though someone feared what might crawl out. Years later, when state surveyors mapped the property, they found anomalies beneath the soil, hollow cavities stretching for hundreds of feet, like a labyrinth dug into the earth. No one excavated them. The farmhouse had already been burned to the ground, erased by the town. But those who lived nearby swore the land still hummed at night, that the air above it bent light strangely, that children disappeared if they wandered too close. And in the official psychiatric files of the Genain Quadruplets, one word kept reappearing in the margins, scribbled in haste: underground. What connection existed between the Morlocks, their children, and what lay buried beneath their land remained sealed. But silence, too, is an answer. In their new life under state custody, the quadruplets developed peculiar behaviors that unsettled even hardened staff. At times they spoke in unison, completing each other's sentences with eerie precision. When asked separate questions in separate rooms, they gave identical answers, down to tone and cadence. Doctors celebrated this as evidence of genetic determinism. But orderlies whispered another word: possession. They resisted individuality. If one was given a toy, she would immediately pass it to her sisters. If punished alone, she would not cry, until reunited with the others, at which point all four wailed as if struck by the same unseen blow. Nurses recorded that they sometimes awoke at exactly the same moment, staring at the ceiling with blank expressions, murmuring phrases in an unrecognized tongue. One nurse described it as like hearing church Latin spoken backward. But the most disturbing incident occurred in 1942, during a demonstration for visiting officials. A psychiatrist asked one of the sisters what had happened to her parents. She froze, her mouth trembling. Then, slowly, all four answered together: "They are beneath the ground. They are not finished with us yet." The doctors laughed nervously, chalking it up to delusion. But the words were written down in the record, before the page was later removed. Even in captivity, the Morlok bloodline spoke truths no one wanted to hear. In 1943, an orphanage ledger surfaced in Springfield's diocesan archives. It was bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed, its handwriting inconsistent, as if penned by multiple hands over decades. Most entries were ordinary, names of foundlings, notes on adoptions, donations from parishioners. But halfway through, the handwriting changes. Names vanish. Instead, numbers appear. Subject 12. Subject 14. Next to each number, strange notations. Good stock. Difficult. Refuses to eat. Then, suddenly, for entries written in red ink, Morlok line, secured. Quadruple replication achieved. To be transferred for study. This was no simple orphanage ledger. It was a catalog. A record of children funneled from families into hands that saw them not as souls, but as specimens. The quadruplets were not the first, nor the last. But they were the most perfect replication of a process begun decades earlier. A process no one in Springfield wanted to acknowledge. The priests called them orphans. The doctors called them patients. But the ledger tells the truth. They were inventory. And at the bottom of one torn page, written in a trembling script, 3 words appear over and over. Not human, not human, not human. In the basement of the Illinois State Psychiatric Institute, archivists discovered a locked cabinet in the 1970s. Inside were hundreds of photographs of the Genain sisters, spanning years. Most showed clinical poses, lined up in chairs, faces blank, doctors smiling beside them. But others were different. Some showed the girls in hospital gowns, standing in a circle around a black, box-like machine. Others showed them crouched on the floor, heads bowed, as if in prayer, though no priest was present. In several, their eyes glowed white, caught by the camera flash in a way that no other photographs of the era displayed. Most disturbing were the photographs labeled only exposure. These showed the girls doubled, blurred, as though the camera had captured them twice at once. In one image, 4 girls are seated, but faint outlines reveal 8 figures in the frame. The doctors dismissed this as faulty equipment. But why? Then, were the images locked away, never published, never acknowledged? One archivist quit after handling them, claiming he felt a pulling sensation in his chest, as though the images were trying to draw him inside. Another swore he could hear faint children's laughter whenever he looked too long. The photographs should not exist, but they do, and they are proof of something no one ever intended to document. The quadruplets were more than 4 children. They were a phenomenon. In 1945, the chief psychiatrist overseeing the Genain sisters vanished. His name was Dr. Charles L. Wentworth, a man celebrated in medical journals for his research on schizophrenia. He was last seen leaving the institute late at night, briefcase in hand. He never returned. Police found his car parked on a dirt road outside Springfield, its driver's side door open, keys still in the ignition. The briefcase was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper, stained and crumpled. On it, scrawled in shaky ink, was a sentence. "They are not ours to keep." Wentworth was declared missing. Weeks later, 2 more doctors left abruptly for personal reasons. A third was found dead in his home, wrists slit, though his family insisted he had no history of despair. The official explanation was stress, the toll of working on such a unique case. But whispers inside the institute told another story, that the doctors had seen too much, that the girls had shown them something in their unison stares, their mirrored gestures, their murmured phrases in languages no one could trace. What happened to Dr. Wentworth's briefcase is unknown. Some say it contained photographs of the underground structures beneath the Morlok farm. Others believe it held medical notes too dangerous to release. What is certain is this: the institute tightened control after his disappearance. The sisters' movements became more restricted. Visitors were banned. Files were sealed. The doctors were no longer studying the quadruplets. They were guarding them. The Second World War provided the perfect cover for secrets. While Americans were transfixed by battlefields overseas, darker experiments continued at home, tucked away in forgotten wards and hidden farms. Some historians believe the Genain case was part of a larger wartime project, a project that sought not just to understand human minds, but to replicate them. Reports trickled in of soldiers suffering identical breakdowns, entire units panicking as if struck by the same thought. Whispered rumors spoke of mirror men, subjects trained to act in unison, controlled not by orders, but by something deeper. The quadruplets were the prototype. For minds, one will. Separate bodies, one origin. In Springfield, townsfolk noticed unusual convoys late at night. Unmarked trucks driving toward the institute, guarded by men with no insignia. Farmers claimed to hear mechanical hums in the distance, punctuated by the shrieks of girls. The war ended in 1945. The convoy stopped. But the quadruplets remained under state control, their lives mapped out like laboratory schedules. For the rest of the world, the war was a chapter closed. For the sisters, it was merely another phase of containment. Their survival was not a triumph. It was a warning. In 1947, 10 years after the Morlok disappearance, state officials quietly transported the quadruplets back to their old farmland. Officially, it was described as a therapeutic excursion, meant to reconnect the girls with their roots. Unofficially, it was a test. Neighbors watched as black sedans and covered trucks rolled into the abandoned fields. The girls were escorted out, hand in hand, their faces blank. They were led to the spot where the farmhouse had stood, the earth still scarred with lime. Witnesses later described a terrible silence falling over the land. Birds ceased to sing. The air grew heavy, vibrating faintly, as if beneath the soil something stirred. Then the girls began to hum, soft at first, then louder, their voices weaving together into a sound no one recognized. The earth trembled. Dogs in the distance howled. Guards rushed forward, attempting to silence them. But the girls only stared downward, their voices rising in perfect unison, until one guard collapsed, clutching his head as blood trickled from his nose. The officials ended the experiment immediately, dragging the girls back into the trucks. The incident was never reported. The guards who witnessed it were transferred. But the land remembers. And from that day forward, no one farmed the Morlok fields again. After the failed return to the farm, the quadruplets were placed under stricter observation. Doctors noted new behavior. The sisters began writing. Pages upon pages of symbols, scrawled with pencils until their fingers bled. At first, the doctors assumed it was gibberish, childlike scribbles, obsessive repetition. But a visiting linguist identified fragments of Proto-Germanic, mixed with words resembling ancient Sumerian and something older still, something unrecorded. The sisters refused to speak in English during these episodes. Instead, they whispered to each other in the same hybrid tongue, their voices overlapping in strange harmonies. When pressed for translation, one phrase appeared repeatedly. The door is not closed. Staff grew uneasy. One orderly claimed he awoke to find the girls standing over his bed, eyes unblinking, whispering in their secret language. Another swore he heard them chanting from separate locked rooms, their voices syncing perfectly through concrete walls. The language was not taught. It was remembered. And with every word they wrote, the institute seemed less like a hospital and more like a prison trying desperately to contain something it could not understand.